All right, everybody. I've got another very special guest, returning guest, Mr. David Pepose.
Hi.
Welcome, David.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. Excited to catch up with you and especially to talk about a project that is near and dear to my heart. It is live on Kickstarter right now. The epic finale of the OZ making its long awaited return, our third and
And
final
I,
issue.
I'm
So,
excited too because I think every time we've talked over the past 3 years, I've brought
yes,
up like when you bring back the OZ, when
we're
you bring
bringing it
back the
back.
OZ. So,
And it's been a long time coming. You're not the only one who's asked. It's been 5 years since the last campaign. And I'm so excited to finally have it back. I want to make it very clear. This book has been written entirely since before the first Kickstarter launch. So it's not Pepos went to Marvel and forgot all about us. It's just taken time to get all the artwork together. Our amazing artist Ruben Rojas. Basically just life happened. He got married. He had a kid. He was in Spain during the worst of COVID. I believe there was something with one of somebody's parents, either his or his wife's. But doing all that while having a day job and raising a kid, he really had to kind of Shawshank his way through our double-sized finale. So he's actually been hard at work on this since the end of the last Kickstarter. It's just taken a bit of time to get all of the artwork finally produced. But as you can see in our preview pages, Ruben really left it all out on the field. And that's the reason why it would have been very easy to say, all right, we're just going to run with a different artist for the third issue. But I felt like I wanted the OZ to remain consistent from beginning to end, that when people read the entire series from start to finish, they'd read a really cohesive piece of storytelling. And frankly, I owe that to Ruben. He is really kind of the wizard of the OZ. He breathed life into all these amazing kind of post-apocalyptic fantasy designs, and so I can tell you, having read the fully drawn, colored, and lettered final issue, I didn't want to hit start in this campaign until it was done. I promise you, it's going to be worth the wait.
was there ever a moment in that time period? I mean, you've had all this success in the direct market, working for Marvel and Dynamite and all these different publishers. Was there ever a moment where you're like, maybe we don't come back to Kickstarter?
No,
Maybe we pitch it
never.
around?
Never. My feeling is that the Kickstarter community supported us for our first two issues, and so I have been very firm that I was like, we are going to finish this on Kickstarter, and I've turned down publishers saying that, because I've said, frankly, also the publishers have tried to offer us some predatory deals and have actually commissioned their own ripoff versions of the OZ when I turn them down. But yeah, I feel like we owe that to the Kickstarter community. They have supported us from the very beginning. And so, yeah, I love the Kickstarter backers. They're a very different breed than the Wednesday Warriors, and they're operating at different speeds and price points. And I love Kickstarter as a platform. I love it as a community. I think it's very empowering as a creator. And so I was adamant that this was going to go to Kickstarter. And if it ever sees another life in the direct market, that would be fantastic. But at this moment, my focus was, we need to serve the Kickstarter community. They did so much for us, bringing this book to life, that I would never even think of going behind their backs, and trying to put this out elsewhere before they got their books first.
Did you ever have, or would you in the future think about continuing with Kickstarter, doing another project on there?
Yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. I like I said, I love the Kickstarter community. I think they've been really, pardon me, they've been so supportive of just books that are a little off the beaten path. Books that maybe for either in terms of style or in terms of just wrong place, wrong time, didn't navigate the traditional publishing sphere. And so, the Kickstarter community, they're really like, they're very omnivorous. They're very adventurous in their tastes. And so, yeah, I love doing Kickstarter. I want to keep doing books on the platform as long as it's viable. I think, the thing, but I mentioned earlier that it's empowering as a creator. Kickstarter makes it that you don't have to ask anybody's permission anymore to tell your story. I mean, for the OZ, for example, and I probably should have started off with this for people who aren't familiar with the book. The book is What If Mad Max Took Place in the Wizard of Oz? It's the story of Dorothy Gale's granddaughter, who's an Iraq war veteran who's caught up in a tornado and stranded in the war-torn land of Oz. And she learns that all of her grandmother's tall tales were actually true, but also killing two wicked witches in a week and then abruptly vanishing. That's not a happy ending. That's a power vacuum, not unlike Baghdad. And so now our new Dorothy is teaming up with her grandmother's former friends in order to bring peace to the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ. And this is a book that I'd originally developed this for a publisher, and we made it to like the 1 yard line, and we wound up getting spiked. There was another book, another fantasy book by more established creators, and so 1 yard line we get spiked. And I remember the editor at the time did me such a solid in telling me, "Don't give up on this. It's really good." And the next week I found Ruben Rojas, and so this is a story that's really been kind of burning at me to tell, but based on just like I said, kind of wrong place, wrong time. We hadn't found a home for it in the direct market, or we had, once the first Kickstarter happened and certain predatory publishers saw dollar signs in their eyes, then they approached us with an extremely bad contract. And so I think Kickstarter is a place where creators can really stay true to their vision. They can really bet on themselves. The price points and timing of Kickstarter really makes them a lot more viable, operating on a smaller scale than sort of the mass-produced direct market books, where you are not only sort of paying for extra books, you're paying for all the creators on a number of books, but you're also paying all the overhead for your staff. Whereas when you're doing sort of the indie garage band kind of thing with Kickstarter, you're just paying yourself and your team, and you're paying your printer, and you're paying your shipping costs. That becomes a much more financially viable proposition, working in Kickstarter's margins. So, yeah, I to circle back to your question, I think Kickstarter is such a vibrant platform. I think it's such an important platform. I don't think it's a replacement for the direct market. I think it's a supplement to it, and vice versa. And so, yeah, that is certainly a platform that I always want to sort of keep my toes in for as long as the community will have me.
Yeah, I always think of Kickstarter as like the double A in baseball.
Yeah.
Eventually, you get called up to the majors with them, but it's a good way to like hone your skills and still put on a show for an audience.
Well, it can be, but I mean, I do feel like there are books that I think are just as good as anything you'll find in the direct market that they've said we don't need it. Like you see, for example, Charlie Stickney from White Ash, who I call him the godfather of Kickstarter comics. And that guy has made a very viable business model, just through Kickstarter. And Pat Shand with all of his work on there, and he was really one of the original trailblazers for the platform. And he always finds all these amazing artists that suddenly Marvel and DC wind up snapping after he winds up killing it in a Kickstarter. So. Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't see Kickstarter as a consolation prize, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is that, I think the way that it was explained to me is, there are different demographics. There are people who buy their comics through the comic shop every Wednesday. And there's the people who read only on Webtoon. And there's the people who go to conventions and buy their stuff. And then there's the people who buy only on Kindle or Comixology or Nihon Ichiban. And then there's the Kickstarter people. And I think it's a different crowd. It's, it's people who are looking for stuff that's a little more off the beaten path. It's people who want that artisanal experience. They're willing to pay the artisanal price point because they want books straight from the creator's hand. And so it's just a different type of muscle group. But I feel like there's a lot of incredible talent on here who it's not a matter of it's not a matter that and that's the only reason why I gave a little gentle pushback, is that it's not a matter that they're not good enough for the direct market, because many people on this place are either from the direct market like myself, or people who for many reasons are not subscribing to sort of the hamster wheel that the direct market can be. And so, yeah, I consider it a place of vast untapped potential. And that's the thing I've always really been a fan of, as both a creator and as somebody who has, I guess, been de facto editor on many of my creator-owned books, is where do trying to find the people who are already super established. It's challenging, there's budgets, there's time frames, there's egos, frankly. Finding people that nobody has heard of but are just as good as those guys, that gets some real crackling energy in there. And you see it with Ruben Rojas. This is a guy who was not a household name, and we got him on the OZ, and we just had a review on CBR that came this morning. Brian Cronin wrote it, where he said that Ruben and Whitney Kogar, they could be on a Big Two title tomorrow. And I think they're 100% right. Hopefully, with me writing, that's really, I think, the joy that a platform like Kickstarter really holds for me, is who's the next big name? Who's the name that, for whatever reason, the powers that be overlooked them? Those are the guys I want to work with, because I'm used to being underestimated, and frankly, I kind of like it that way, because that means that it makes it that much easier to really upend expectations. And yeah, finding these kind of new talents, that's Kickstarter's specialty. And so it's such a vibrant platform that I liken it to different food groups. Like, I would never just want to eat one food group for the rest of my life, or play in one genre for the rest of my life. And I guess that, as I'm saying it feels the same way about marketplaces. Is that why be beholden to only one marketplace when I could branch out to as many places as I can?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't mean it to sound like a consolation prize.
Oh yeah.
Like,
no. I figured anybody who's listening that to make sure that they didn't feel that way, because I get it. Like, Kickstarter, it can be intimidating, especially for somebody who's never done it, or for people who have heard horror stories. I mean, there are people who have done Kickstarter who, I will say, you hear horror stories about Kickstarter every so often. And I think there's sometimes this idea of, oh, there's somebody who's like a scam artist who's like trying to bilk you out of your money. And I don't think that's the case more often than not. I mean, maybe there's the occasional sociopath out there, but I genuinely think any horror stories that do happen it's creators who get in over their skis. That maybe they didn't budget their print costs properly, or maybe they didn't budget what the shipping was going to look like. Or maybe they had a collaborator who flaked. That I've certainly had collaborators who flaked on me. I've paid for whole issues for series that never got finished because the guy vanished. And so that's always unfortunate, and that I think makes Kickstarter an intimidating prospect. But I can tell you that specifically for the OZ, this is a book that's 100% done. So really the only intimidating factor is just signing up and then just deciding what you want to buy. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things that I think Kickstarter is often a misunderstood platform, for sure. I think it's one that the publishers started dipping their toes into during COVID, and publishers are conservative, and so I think they've reeled back a little bit, which is a shame, because I feel like there's a symbiosis to be had between the direct market and Kickstarter, and a place where there's room for everybody. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that's why I think Kickstarter, like I said, that's the reason why I do so much outreach on all this, is because not only do I feel like I'm representing my book with the OZ, but I do feel like, given where I am in the direct market, I feel like I am kind of like really trying to be an ambassador for this other platform. As like I said, sort of a supplement to the Wednesday Warrior habits.
Yeah. And you saw, like you said, you saw some publishers really pushing to publish these Kickstarter books, and I think two in particular, we won't name names, got a little too ahead of themselves in it. They were shotgun blasting things out instead of really like pushing certain ones.
Yeah.
And you're right. I've seen a few. I know Mad Cave has a couple. One that came out last year and one coming out this year.
Yeah.
Mind you, Jimmy Palmiotti's attached to that. But then Image did one too with the Bigfoot book they did. I'm zoning on the name of it now. And they just they seem to want to target more directly and push them as
Yeah.
the thing. As
Yeah.
opposed to just putting like 20 out at once and seeing which one sticks, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot of people are kind of figuring it out. Kickstarter has evolved quite a bit, even since the last campaign, because you see what the economy looks like in 2026, and you see what social media looks like in 2026, and you see what searching, Google looks like in the year 2026. It's a much more fragmented marketplace. I certainly even consider, I'm a day in on my new campaign, and I consider it a learning curve of, okay, like what kind of tricks can I try? So a lot of times we are all kind of throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. But yeah, I think there's something to be had. I think I've been very lucky, and then I feel like I've kind of had a village of Kickstarter creators who have kind of helped me a little bit over along the way. People like Charlie Stickney, Pat Shand, Ryland Grant, Dave Schrader, Stephen Prince, just to name a few. But yeah, it's definitely the Kickstarter can be a little bit of the Wild West. Things are always shifting. You never know kind of what the trends are, but also just the state of how you can promote things. And I think it's very challenging for anybody right now to promote something, given the way that Twitter looks and given the way that Google looks. It's another reason why I hate AI, is because all these AI things are making it so much more difficult for handcrafted stuff like the OZ. And that just means that I have to push twice as hard. So it's been fun, because I feel so passionately about this book. This is something that I started working on very early in my career. This is one of the first ideas I came up with after Spencer and Locke. And so I've been working on this in some capacity since 2018. I finished writing it early days of COVID. I wrote it the back half concurrently with Scout's Honor, if you can believe it or not. That and 10-Ton Titan Terrier. So it's been a long time coming. I think this third Kickstarter in particular is so exciting for me, but very poignant as well, because I look back, I got the artwork back on a script that I wrote in 2020, and getting to revisit the lettering pass as a creator who's had a kind of a whole ass career since that last Kickstarter. I didn't have a Marvel book when that last Kickstarter happened. I had just been hired at Marvel, but nobody knew yet. And we hadn't won the Ringo Award yet. And to see kind of the amazing but unexpected turns that my career has taken and the lessons I've learned since then, it was really kind of wonderful to revisit this, especially the last issue, to find the nips and tucks, to make sure that it was punchy, but to make sure that it still read consistently with what the previous two issues did. And so when when the final lettering came in, it was very unlike when I usually finish a book. When I usually finish a book, it kind of feels like I finished the marathon. I cleared the finish line, and now I can collapse. But this, it was, I couldn't help but feel a sense of compassion for that kind of younger, wilder, scrappier guy who came out of the gate swinging, because he had no idea what his future held. He had no idea if he knew what he was doing. And, I look back on it and now I'm like, you did good, kid. Like, I can take it from here. So yeah, this book in particular is a very unique experience. But I will say, having read all of it sort of from start to finish, it's a little surprising that the themes still feel so relevant, that they still resonate. I think it speaks to the kind of the world that we live in a lot of ways. I mean, our first. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I think the unfortunate reality, and I try to get too political often, but one I'm very passionate about is war. I
Yeah.
think the unfortunate reality of the world we live in is that's a never-ending cycle that
Yeah.
seems to just be going on and on. We see what's going on right now with Iran.
Yeah.
Me and you are on the same age. We both grew up with the whole Iraq crisis,
Yes.
and I
It's
knew so many people coming out of that. That's why when you were making this book, it kind of felt poignant to me, even though I didn't serve, because I just know so many people who
Yes.
did.
Well,
You know,
once upon a time, I was a newspaper reporter. That's what I did before before I became a comic book writer. And I worked in newsrooms all around the country. And I'm not just talking about when I was moonlighting at Newsarama. I actually had a day job working in the newspaper. And it taught me a lot of skills that I use today in comics, about writing on a deadline and writing modularly so I can kind of shift scenes around, and also having to be very quick with ideas because you needed to have an idea every day. And the I had many beats. I was sort of a general assignment reporter, and so I carved out a lot of weird niches for myself. Like I did the crime beat at night. I did state politics. I found myself in the local veterans beat. And I remember I did a story kind of talking about both what the local resources were in Berkshire County, Massachusetts. I wrote for the Berkshire Eagle, talking about what the local resources were for returning veterans, but also interviewing a lot of returning veterans about sort of just what it was like reintegrating back into civilian life. And there were so many, these stories really stuck with me and wound up kind of becoming the character of Dorothy Gale, talking about how, things in our civilian life that seemed very normal to us and seemed very normal to them before they went overseas into this much more regimented, sometimes kind of like dangerous situation. And so they come back to civilian life and things aren't regimented. Things feel very chaotic and individualistic. The priorities are very different. Also, like just the stimuli that you hear. This we live in a loud, boisterous country, but when you've been under gunfire overseas, or you've heard explosions, or you're dealing with PTSD or traumatic brain injury, or you've seen people die right in front of you, that is very challenging for people to reintegrate into something that once was so normal for them. And
that's a good place to PSA real quick.
Yeah.
4th of July coming up.
Yeah.
We always talk about fireworks and dogs.
Yeah.
Fireworks and vets, man.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
We have a bit even just in issue 1, where Dorothy, our lead character, she's come back home to Kansas to take care of her ailing grandmother after sort of a disastrous final tour overseas, and we have a panel, and it's kind of easy to miss, but there's a 9-panel grid, and it's on the preview page. It's on my Twitter page right now, where Dorothy is feeding her grandmother, and her grandma had knocked over a cup, and it shattered on the ground, and you see this look on Dorothy's face, like this look of horror, because it was that shock. Her back was turned, and we have a line. It's Dorothy's actual first line in the book. And it's they say there's no place like home, but for me, home is just another place that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that is kind of the mission statement of this book and of Dorothy as a character. And I think it kind of sums up my interpretation of the stories that a lot of these veterans told me, is that, again, this place that was so natural growing up, once you've left and you've come back, suddenly the reality is not jiving with your memories of it. And I think that speaks to the concept of the OZ, which is, we all have this idea of Oz burned inside our minds. That the film in particular, I think, really captured the Wizard of Oz into the cultural zeitgeist. You can imagine those archetypical characters, doing sort of the chorus line down the Yellow Brick Road, and we're subverting that. We're really kind of interrogating the source material and saying, if this is true, if the original Dorothy killed both of the Wicked Witches and exposed the Wizard of Oz, who then split before things got too hot, what does that mean? It's
a huge power vacuum.
It's a huge power vacuum. And I think that kind of speaks a little bit to maybe this sort of feeling that a lot of us have in the country, sort of this feeling of mourning, that this idea that, and many of us become disillusioned with the country at some point or another. But I think, we grow up as kids, and many of us, we have this idea of what our country is and what it stands for. And then as we grow older, the more we learn, and then the more we see unfolding upon us today, we're like, oh, the country's ideals and the country's actions are two very different things. And I feel like, we are living in kind of a dark time right now. We've been living in dark times for, about a decade. And I think that's the idea of sort of this memory that we have of the country that doesn't really exist, that we can't go back to, that idea of home. Not only is it impossible to reach it, I'm not sure it really existed the way that we maybe have idealized it. And then how do we sort of overcome sort of this trauma that we are going through today to finally kind of grab this future that seems perpetually out of reach, this better future? Yeah. And so that's really Dorothy's journey in a lot of ways. And so I think that's the thing that's made this book have some legs over the last, 6 years since the first campaign, is that the themes sometimes feel a little scary in terms of how timely they are. But I think that's ultimately been my goal, is to sort of take kind of the big picture of war and fascism and people submitting to it or fighting against it, and really trying to boil it down through the eyes of one very human character. And I think that's been sort of my goal, is to make this story, because we tell it through Dorothy's eyes, and because we tell it through these very iconic mythologies, that, no pun intended, the goal is to make this story feel evergreen, that you can, read the OZ now, or you can read it 6 years ago, or you can read it 6 years from now, and it's all going to feel like you just read it yesterday.
Yeah, I always try in my public facing version of me to stay apolitical in nature, but obviously I'm a very political person, just like anyone else.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've been really mulling around, talking a little bit here and there, throwing things out there to people, is this idea of what people are kind of pushing back on, politics in my media.
Yeah.
And I don't personally like to put people in a bubble of they're just an asshole, or they're just a fascist, or whatever word you want to throw out there. I always think there's a reason behind people's actions for the most part.
Sure.
And I think you actually said something in there that really fits into kind of that mold, because I always thought the OZ, while being this great kind of war story and this look back at this great fiction that we know from when we were kids, and even recently with Wicked, it's also a very political book, but I don't think most people would pick it up and say that it's a very political book.
Yeah.
And I've been kind of thinking over the past 5 or so years, I don't think people are pushing back against politics. I think they're pushing back against bad writing.
Well, I think, it's a good point. It's something I think about it all the time. I think, of course, I'm never going to fault anybody whose reach exceeds their grasp, because ultimately, I know that they're coming from a place of good. They're trying to sort of make a more equitable world in whatever small, baby, tiny steps we can make as comic book writers. Because I know we're not brain surgeons. We're not, rocket scientists. I think there are different approaches to it. And I think I recognize I'm a straight white guy, I'm Jewish, which I think gives me an interesting little perspective on things, because I'm somebody who isn't part of the cultural norm, but I pass. And so that it is something I think about, is just okay, as somebody who is cognizant of things, because the thing I love most about our country is that I am able to live as a Jewish person. I'm able to practice my faith and not be thrown in jail or killed for it, which a lot of my ancestors in other countries were. And so I'm always trying to, that's why I'm always thinking that's something that I would want for people who are of a different race, or LGBT, or immigrants, and yet, as a straight white guy, the way that I approach these things is different, because I can't speak for a marginalized community authentically, because I'm not a member of that community. So instead, I try to approach my stuff with this idea of, you know, if you squint, you can kind of see the messages I'm trying to say. I mean, you know, I'm the guy who spent 10 years lobbying to write Captain Planet. You know, it's one of those things that, or you look at something like Spencer and Locke, which is a book about mental health. You know, I think there's more than one way to skin a cat, and you know, the thing I'll counter with is that there are some people who might read my book and the message will just fly right over their head. You know, and so there's multiple ways to do it, and that's why I'm so glad that like it's not just me. You know, so there's a lot of ways to do it, and sure, there are certainly books that try and maybe miss the mark, or maybe they are sort of preaching to a readership that's not ready to hear the message, or they're preaching to the wrong group. And I'm no sociologist. I don't have the answer for it, but you know, I think there are certain books that I think are really interesting with that. But for me, as a straight white guy, the way I try to approach the politics in my work, I know it's very difficult. There's very few cases where I can be super overt about it, super direct about it, because otherwise I'll be speaking for a group that I'm not a part of. So instead, I kind of try to take sort of the roundabout approach for it, exactly like you were talking about, where like when you read the thing, you're like, oh yeah, like, you know, this actually does kind of have sort of that message to it, but it's woven very finely into it. So, but yeah, I think it's one of those things. I'm trying to think, you know, it's like off the top of my head. Like I see, like, you know, I love what Dennis Camp's doing on Ultimates, where like I feel like that guy is always taking a big swing. I really admire that. It's something I try to do in my work. And so you know, you see Ultimates is the one that really springs to mind, because like that is sort of this heightened, exaggerated sort of you know, fascist leaning state that the Ultimates are sort of freedom fighters in. So I wouldn't I'm not going to disparage anybody necessarily who you know, who may miss the mark, because I know they're trying. But yeah, there's many ways to do it. But I think to address your bigger point, because I completely empathize with people who are exhausted. You know, like, you know, I think it's times are hard right now. You know, the prices for everything's going up, which means everybody's time is shrinking, everybody's budget is shrinking, and yet we all still need a break. We all still need a minute to catch our breath. And so I empathize with the people who say, listen, I've been working, you know, 60-hour weeks and I got my $5 for a comic and I don't want to feel like I'm being browbeaten. And you know, it's one of those things that like there's always an adjustment, you know, like sometimes a book is not for you. And even if it's your favorite character, sometimes
that's an important point right there, everybody.
You know, I can tell you that like there are certain characters where that like I love those characters, and sometimes you feel like a Mets fan, you know, where or the team of your choosing. But you know, where you're like, oh, that's a run, I guess. You know, and for me, I you know, I dip out if that's the case. Like, you know, no harm, no foul. I'll find something else to read. But I recognize also that as a comics writer, I think my palate's a little more rarefied than most, than the average person reading a comic. And so there are people who are just like, I want Spider-Man. Just throwing that in there. I want Spider-Man, but I don't want it without Mary Jane, you know? And I get that. I love Mary Jane, so I and that's why I love the new Venom book, is because they're giving MJ something fun to do. So I get it. But you know, I think that's the beauty of comics, though, is that they're always refreshing. So if there's ever a take you don't like, especially if it's like a licensed character, if it's a short run thing, you know, an original series, then it's very easy to forget. Just let it go. But yeah, if it's like a licensed long running character, and I think those are the ones that tend to generate the most controversy.
Yeah.
You know,
Biggest fan bases. Yeah.
yeah, that's I will say that is the beauty of comics is that none of us are ever on a book that long anymore. Even Space Ghost, you know, I'm wrapping up year 2, and we've got a miniseries coming, and then sliding into year 3. You know, that's considered a really long run by today's standards, and that's unless you're on a flagship book. 3 years is about the max you can look at these days. So, but no, I get your point. And yeah, politics, it's hard. It's certainly hard to pull it off for sure.
I also think I'll step back the bad writing comments. I know you were politely and politically like pushing back on that, small p politically, but I'll say people just missed the mark. Like I think some people just miss. It's kind of what happened with the last season of The Boys. Like you forgot to write a show.
No spoilers. No spoilers.
But yeah. So it's tough. It's a tough conversation. I like to believe personally, David. I'm an optimist in nature. I like to believe that most people are good. Yeah. And we through our world and through social media, we just constantly see the bad.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big problem is because when you go out there in the world and you talk to people, there's not a whole lot of the shit you see on X or Facebook.
Social media is certainly a bad place. It's a bad place, and I wish we could just I wish we could leave it. I certainly wish I could leave it, and I wish my business wasn't so tied to it. But yeah, I think I think the flip side of all of this is that it's sort of a reflection of the world we're living in today. Is that I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Nashville, but they have that line where like they say if you may not be thinking about politics, but politics is thinking about you. Yeah. And when things are getting really bad, people start thinking about politics quite a bit. You can't escape it in the headlines. And as a result, and this is an interesting trend that I've noticed kind of as long as I've been in comics and in the periphery in comics, and I think it kind of leads into the trend that you were talking about, which is, we want, first off, I think the comics readers, not predominantly, but I think there's at least a very large or loud contingent, vocal contingent, I should say. I think there's certainly a contingent that wants to see the politics of today reflected in their media, as you see in many other bits of media, as sort of their way of metabolizing and coping with the things going on today. However, comics are tricky. It's a tricky beast to kind of juggle all that in, both in terms of the pacing of it all. 22 pages or 20 pages a month for most big 2 books. The OZ is double sized, 44 pages. Doing that monthly. But also, I think the core concept of superheroes is interesting and sometimes a little dicey politically when you really stop to think about it. Because, if we were really like living in the real world, we would not want somebody like Batman or Superman. Even Superman, I'm not sure is somebody we would want running around. Like, I do think, unfortunately, The Boys, I haven't seen last season, don't spoil it for me, seems like what it would probably turn into. That the superheroes, they wouldn't be able to stay anonymous, and the government wouldn't be able to kill them. They would find them too useful and too difficult to kill, so they would pay them off. They would turn them into celebrities and commodify them. And so, anyway, that was a long roundabout way of saying, I think comics in particular, like, and maybe this is, I don't know if this is the readership that's driven this. I don't know if it's the creators that have driven this. I mean, I've sort of come in after everything has already happened. But I think this industry, and maybe this is our original sin, we started off as children's books, like little kid stuff. And as, people have gotten older, it used to be we would just cycle out. People used to treat comics like we treat Bluey today. Like, you're not going to be an adult Bluey fan unless you're a grateful parent, thankful that their kid can watch Bluey. It used to be everyone would cycle out every 5 years. That's why they would just repeat plots. Sometimes they would just reprint things whole cloth every 5 years because they just figured the readership is going to cycle out. And somewhere along the way, the readers got very invested, and so they kind of stuck around through adulthood. And as a result, we've made the stories more adult and more sophisticated. And listen, as an adult comics fan, I love that. However, I think there's sometimes that pressure of how do we justify that? Of how do we justify this medium? And it is adult. And so I think one of the ways of doing that has been to sort of say, like, okay, but then how do we explore the politics of today through that? And I want to make it clear. I think that's great. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think the result is that we've taken more swings, and I think invariably as you take more swings, noticeably more swings, of course there are going to be people who see the swings that don't connect or the swings that they don't agree with, because there are people who are like, I'm just here for the fights, and so I think there's no perfect balance to be had whatsoever. I think it's just a matter of thank goodness there's so many flavors, because that way then everybody winds up getting their ice cream cone of their choice.
Yeah, we also get too much up our own asses about it, because the fact of the matter is whether we want to admit it or not, and whether it makes us happy or not, Dogman is kicking everybody's ass.
I know.
So
what I wouldn't do to be writing Dogman, that guy crushing it. I can tell you, you know what? That if I had Dogman, I probably would not be on Kickstarter. Unfortunately, no shade to the Kickstarter community, but yeah, I think, I guess speaking of the Kickstarter community, I know I kind of went on a long tangent. I think that the fun thing about Kickstarter's platform is talking about value. We talked about it a little bit earlier about how people, their budgets are tight, their time is tight. They just want to find something that'll give them a moment to catch their breath. Mm-hmm. That's how I justify this job every night before I go to bed. And so, when you're working in the direct market, your options are fairly limited. You just have to be like, okay, I've got 20 pages, or I've got 22 pages. I got to make whatever's in that. That's all I got, And don't get me wrong, like, the story is always the most important thing. Mm-hmm. However, when you're on Kickstarter, you're able to sort of control the metrics a little bit, and you're able to control what you are giving. That's a whole other ballgame. You certainly open yourself up quite a bit. I mentioned earlier, Kickstarter is, often by people who are looking to buy an artisanal product, straight from the creators. And often that means it's an artisanal price point. It is a bit higher. And so for me, it's always been, okay, how do I justify that I'm charging extra, that I'm charging more than we would for a company subsidized, mass produced comic that's at $5 at your local comic shop. So we've actually added a lot to sort of make the OZ have sufficient bang for your buck. First off, it's double sized. Every issue we've done of the series is 44 pages, because I want to make sure you're really getting your money's worth with the story, and we're able to let things breathe. And I had this conversation with another creator the other day. The shift from 20 to 20 or 22 to 20 pages is noticeable. You lose a lot in that 10%. The character moments, the grace notes. That's why all my books at Dynamite and Mad Cave are all 22 pages. Anyway, I digress. Also, on top of that, every single backer is not just getting the OZ. They're also getting the first issue of my 5-time Ringo Award nominated book, Spencer and Locke, which is currently out of print. They're also getting Going to the Chapel, #1, my action rom-com. And they're getting George Santiago Jr. and I's superhero story, Roxy Rewind. So that is an extra 64 pages. That's an extra 64 pages on top of the 44 that we were already giving you. So you're getting 108 pages just for backing.
Clarify, those are digital copies, right?
Those are digital, yes. Spencer and Locke, Chapel, and Roxy are all digital. However, if you're interested in doing things in print, we've also got all of my trade paperbacks available as add-ons. So if you're interested in, say, Spencer and Locke, which is a book that's out of print, Going to the Chapel, also out of print. Scout's Honor, which I'm fairly certain is either out of print or locked in Diamond's warehouse. I have them, so you can get them from me. You can also get Space Ghost Volume 1, which is, I believe, currently locked in a Diamond warehouse. That's a weird trend, but I have several copies, many copies, you would say, of Space Ghost Volume 1. You can get all of that from me. We've got everything added as individual add-ons. We've also got discounted bundle sets in themes. So if you want my Marvel work, if you want my creator-owned work, if you want my cartoon work, we got you covered. So beyond sort of, okay, this 44-page issue, the 64 pages of PDFs that you're going to get, we're also doing behind-the-scenes materials. So you're going to get my scripts for either issue 3, or if you get our print and digital catch-up tiers, you can get issues 1 and 2. You'll get behind the scenes. You'll get my scripts. You'll get Ruben's inks. You're going to get Whitney Kogar's colors. So you're going to be able to kind of see how this book came together from sort of start to finish. But wait, we got more stuff coming because Kickstarter has stretch goals, and I'm very excited. We've got a few really exciting stretch goals planned. Starting off with, in lieu of doing a print, this campaign, we are doing a fully illustrated map of the occupied zone, drawn by Kenneth
Very
Reckman.
cool.
So we are going to be offering that as our first stretch goal. So that's going to be fun. We've got an exclusive bookmark from Ruben Mocho, which is really cool. I know people have been asking for bookmarks for a while. We've got our enamel pins that we did in our last 2 campaigns. I wouldn't be surprised if we might have a third one coming. We've got our Monkey See, Monkey Doom stickers. These are all available as add-on purchases. We've also got, I'm very excited for this, my good friend George Marston is recording a closing credit song that we're going to offer as a digital EP to go along with our first campaign's theme song, Heart of Tin, and a second song sort of in the middle of all this. So the OZ tapes will be a digital stretch goal reward. So we're really finding ways to kind of, just keep adding more and more value. On top of that, we're also doing our creator grab bag. So we're going to have PDFs from a variety of established and indie creators. So you're going to be able to get, last time we did 10 PDFs. I think we'll be able to do that again. So that's another 220 pages, 200 to 220 pages thereabouts. So you're getting a lot of material just even at, just buying one comic. If you missed our previous campaigns, there's also, like I said, there's catch-up tiers. So you can get all 3 issues in one shot, or if you showed up for the first campaign and missed the second one, or somehow vice versa, we've got all of the issues a la carte. You can add them as add-ons. We also have all of the variant covers. We have 14 variant covers available across all 3 issues. And so you can get any of them individually. You can get all 4 covers for this campaign at a discount. You can get all 14 covers at a bundle at a discount. We're really trying to sort of target every possible buyer at every possible price point. So no matter, sort of what's your budget, if you get the OZ, you're going to be in for a good time.
Yeah, and I'm happy to hear that because I don't think enough Kickstarter creators are thinking about the bang for your buck, as you put it, on the platform. And yeah, that's a lot of really cool stuff people can get.
Yeah, we're trying to offer quite a lot because, like I said, it's an artisanal price, for an artisanal product. And as somebody who's like constantly sort of thinking, how can I wring as much blood out of the stone as I can, even in my direct market work, being able to do that on Kickstarter has been a really fun opportunity.
So speaking of which, I'd like to do a quick kind of rapid fire in some of your direct market, because I know you still got a bunch of stuff coming out in direct market. You mentioned Space Ghost, so that's continuing on, it seems like, for at least the near future.
Yes, it is.
We can count on at least another year probably of that.
That is the goal.
That's the plan, yeah. So is Captain Planet still going, or did that conclude?
So that's at least on hiatus. Dynamite and I are actually just talking about that. We are still kind of in discussion about that. It comes down to timing, honestly. Pardon me. When we first signed up for the book, we had only committed to the first 6, and we were kind of saying, let's see how this goes. And, to pull the curtain back, one unfortunate thing that happened when Captain Planet came out is it came out right as everything sort of hit critical mass with Diamond. Diamond Distribution, they went bankrupt, and our publisher Dynamite had invested very heavily in them. That's why
took a big hit.
They took a big hit. That's why you can't get Space Coast Volume 1 is because it's currently locked in Diamond's warehouse. And so, and what that wound up doing is it kind of really affected the release schedule of Captain Planet, and that we had our first issue, and then we had a long gap immediately thereafter as Dynamite was sort of switching distribution to Lunar. And so as a result, then they kind of had a rapid fire through the remaining 5 issues to get everything back on the normal printing schedule. So, as a result, it's when we kind of finished that storyline, it was difficult to kind of get the word of mouth that I really wanted to for a miniseries of that length. And on top of that, our amazing artist Amon Casalos had to step back. He had been hired by the Missouri Supreme Court, believe it or not, to do a graphic novel for them, and he had pushed that nice-paying government job to do Captain Planet. So he needed some time, and frankly, I was at capacity. I was juggling Space Coast and Speed Racer, and I just finished Cable 11 Chrome, and I had written Captain Planet. I was juggling all 4 of those concurrently, and that was a challenge, to say the least. And so Dynamite had talked to me then and said, hey, is there any interest for potentially doing more? And I said, I love the characters. If Amon can't do it, maybe we wait and see, kind of how my schedule is looking and how his schedule is looking. And so I just recently had a conversation with Dynamite about it, and it ultimately comes down to bandwidth. I'm juggling a lot of work right now. It's a good problem to have, but something had to give. And I think given that the release schedule on Captain Planet was kind of so disrupted by the distributor shift, and because it's such an involved book to write, it's like writing a heist book, because you need to know where all the characters are at any given time, especially because you need to know where you're going to deploy Captain Planet, and what are you going to do with the Planeteers when they have no powers during all that. So, and frankly, I was surprised. I wrote this book kind of before the current administration, and then in the early days of the current administration. And even then, as the book was coming out, there were certain things that I had written that I was actually a little surprised that, we anticipated some headlines, and sometimes some of the headlines wound up coming out crazier than what we wrote. So it's not a never. It's just not right now, just because Space Coast is still ongoing, and Speed Racer, I still have another 4 issues left at least, and I have a few other projects that are in sort of various stages of percolation, plus this Kickstarter. So it's not on the horizon at the moment. There's no plans as of right now. If Dynamite gave the book to somebody else, they would be completely within their prerogative, and I would have no hard feelings. The story that we told with Captain Planet was the one I had really wanted to tell. But there are some other characters I left on the table, because in case we got to come back for more. So, I think there's some fun stories to be told, particularly with Hoggish Greedley and Verminous Scum. Never say never. It's just a matter of life's real busy at Casa de Pepose, and unfortunately something had to give, and unfortunately old Cap, he was the hardest one, so he had to be on the shelf for a little while.
So speaking of Speed Racer, how many issues are you in? You're close to 12, right?
So issue 9 is coming out tomorrow on Wednesday, June 10th. It's the first part of our Demon on Wheels storyline. And I'm writing issue 12 right now as we speak. I'm contracted through at least 15. So, and then I guess plus the issue 0 that we did for Free Comic Book Day. I'm in the middle of writing our 12th issue right now. I know Davide Tinto is hard at work on drawing issue 11 as we speak. There is going to be a gap in between issues 10 and 11. Mad Cave likes to do that in between arcs, sort of to give the trade a little bit of time on its own. So I'm not 100% sure when issue 11 comes out yet. But we're hard at work on the third arc now. But yeah, Demon on Wheels is going to be fun. Speed is exposed to an experimental street drug called V-gas, which kind of unleashes his sort of worst self, untethered from his usual moral compass. And so that's like a really fun storyline. We've had Speed face all these kind of different threats, and having him have to kind of face the demons within is really fun. It's sort of his Venom storyline, Spider-Man or Batman, take your pick. As we see, he's dosed and he has no idea. So his family is just horrified when we see him just like unleashed on the tracks with like just the gloves completely off. And Davide Tinto has done such an amazing job drawing it. I gave him a direction in tomorrow's issue. I said the Mach 5 uppercuts a car, and he did it. He did a great job with it, in fact. So, and that's going to kind of lead up to issue 10. Racer X is really the only one who knows what's going on. That this V-gas has a little bit of a tie to his own past, training in the jungles of Kapetapek. And so, it's going to be Speed versus Racer X, the rematch, in the heart of an active volcano. It really is like, it is sort of like, our callback to classic Speed Racer stories, but like really leaning into the character of it all. We've spent so much time building Speed's relationship with the supporting cast, and now we get to pay that off. That it's really, it's a team effort. It's going to be Trixie and Pops and Spritle and Racer X all trying to pull Speed from the brink to stop him before he does something irrevocable that he'll regret for the rest of his life. That's going to be really fun, and that'll lead us to our two-part story featuring the Melange, which is an iconic Speed Racer villain. I'm so excited for that storyline. We had a character called Carl Cranham in issues 6 and 7 that was sort of the evil version of Speed. The Melange is like our evil version of Racer X. We've been picking off corrupt Formula X officials, and unfortunately when Racer X tried to stop them, all he got for his troubles was getting his ass handed to him, and the police now think he did it. So this is going to be a fun kind of detective story coming out in Arc 3, where Speed kind of has to use his head, which is difficult for him. He's usually very reckless, very headstrong. He's got to figure out what is the Melange, who set up Racer X, and how can he clear his friend's name. So that's going to be very fun. If you like what I did with Space Spectre over in Space Ghost, I think you'll enjoy the Melange. That's sort of the vibe I've been picking up as I've been writing them. And that'll lead us to our big 3-part kind of capstone for our preliminary plans with the book of Speed in the Formula X Championship. As he faces Dante Furno, the owner of the car acrobatic team, who suits up one more time as the ruthless Captain Terror. So Speed's going to go through it. This has been a really fun book to work on, and one that's very personal to me. Speed is a character who's really driven by passion, somebody who eats and breathes and sleeps racing. And as a comics creator, somebody who, this is my passion, somebody who, spent many years learning the craft, voraciously reading everything I could, and then kind of tripping and falling into becoming an indie creator and then becoming a mainstream creator. Speed's journey really reflects my own in so many ways of, kind of the pressure of being an enthusiast who suddenly goes pro, being in that spotlight under that scrutiny. What are the successes and the highlights? What are the failures and the setbacks? How do you get up from those? How do you, snatch, victory from the jaws of defeat and vice versa? And what about all the people who help you cross the finish line? That's the story of Speed Racer, and that's my story too. So that's a book that's very near and dear to me.
And so I thought I feel with Space Ghost, you do a really great job of, for the most part, I think there's a few 2-issue storylines with that, but that feels like a book that you can kind of jump in at any point and really just join the ride with.
Yeah.
Is Speed Racer kind of got the same feel?
Yes. Speed, Space Ghost was very much written as done in ones and done in twos. and Speed Racer is the same. It's sort of in the reverse. It's more of done in twos and done in ones. But yes, like we've always tried to make it that like the stories are very compact, that you can kind of jump in and jump out anytime you want. It's also very easy to get on board with the series. The first trade is out, so you can get issues 0 through 5, which is a really kind of nice mission statement for our book. It really kind of sets up Speed and his supporting cast and sort of his journey to Formula X and the reason why he's doing this, which is that his father Pops had a heart attack, and so he needs a transplant. And so that's why Speed is competing, is that he needs $1 million in order to pay for a heart transplant. And that's what you do need to pay for a heart transplant when you don't have insurance in the United States. So this book actually is also a little political as well. Speed Racer is a book that's really about class. When you kind of really bore down into it, is that Speed is the guy from the other side of the tracks who suddenly is sort of competing with all these people, the rich and famous who have been doing this for years, and all Speed's got is his grit and his talent. It's very rocky. And so there's a lot of ways you can get on board. If you're really curious about Speed Racer and you don't want to pay a penny, the free comic book day issue is available, I believe, on Comixology, but definitely on the Mad Cave site. You can get that for free, and so that is sort of our teaser of exploring Speed Racer through the eyes of his city, Palm City, which is sort of like the ultimate racing town. And I like the idea of kind of writing about a place that has its own sense of character. I grew up in St. Louis, that's Cardinals town, and so like the team spirit was very big when I was there growing up, particularly during the Mark McGuire years. And the Rams years, the Kurt Warner years. That's a really fun series. And if you like what I'm doing on Space Ghost, Speed Racer, we're really, it shares a lot of DNA, particularly in the approach and the way that I've been sort of trying to revitalize that and bring Speed Racer into the modern era.
And then I think something I've been curious about, I'm hoping other people are too. Since I think Cable, Love and Chrome was your last Marvel work?
Yes.
Has the Marvel work kind of taken a back seat for right now, or?
It has. I mean, it's one of those things that I never really anticipated Space Coast to blow up in the way that it has. And it was one of those things that I was offered kind of Captain Planet and Speed Racer literally in the same weekend. And so it's been kind of like a whirlwind. I mean, I've frankly said I have so much work on my plate that I haven't even really had a chance to be knocking on Marvel or DC's door, because sort of the work offers have kind of kept coming. I've got sort of the licensed work that I'm working on, and then the creator-owned stuff like the OZ, but there are other creator-owned stuff that I'm working on presently. And then, it's funny, this licensed niche, I never expected to carve it for myself, but it's been a really fun trip because I'm able to take kind of all the lessons I've learned from Marvel and take a lot of the conventions that I would have done in books over there. But I'm able to do it without really like with so much freedom. The thing about writing for the big two, and this is no shade on them whatsoever, but when you're writing in a shared universe that stretches across multiple titles, there's a lot of horse trading that goes on in terms of the characters, in terms of not repeating what somebody else is doing, not stepping on another book's toes, a bigger book's toes. And you don't know any of these things. You're basically doing it blindfolded. And you're sort of trusting that your editor will tell you kind of like, oh, no, you can't use that character because somebody else is using them. Or you can't use this character in this story because they were already in a story sort of like that recently. Or, hey, you can't really take that story avenue because they're doing it in Spider-Man, for example. I know my Punisher miniseries, we dealt with that a lot because there were a lot of characters that I wanted to use that were being used in Gang War over in the Amazing Spider-Man. And so, whereas like in Space Ghost, if I want to use Zorak, I just use Zorak. I don't have to ask anybody's permission to do that. And so it's been very unexpected. I think a lot of people overlook licensed books, and I understand why. Is because historically they've been cash grabs. Historically it's been, let's try to just do a cheap parroting of what the original cartoon was, or what have you, and the people who are fans will buy it, and it's a base hit that sort of shores up our bottom line, and they run the math, and usually whatever money that they make is enough to offset the licensing cost, and so it's a little bit of an extra trickle of money in for everybody. I think Daniel Warren Johnson kind of broke that mold with Transformers, and sort of started this wave that I've been fortunate to be a part of. You see it with the Energon universe. You see it with what Josh Williamson's doing on GI Joe. You see it with Declan Shalvey's doing on Thundercats. I feel very fortunate to be doing that on Space Ghost and Speed Racer. Licensed books are no longer this sort of soulless thing, but they can really be used as to make an artistic statement, which is always kind of why I'm doing this, And so, it's been an interesting couple of years having carved this niche for myself, but I really enjoy it, And so it's never say never. I of course, if the right project came from Marvel, or I haven't done any work at DC yet, I would love to at some point when my schedule clears up. But right now I'm writing 4 books plus the Kickstarter. And I have a baby coming in a month, so my capacity is beyond maxed. So it's one of those things that I certainly wouldn't mind knocking on the big two's door again, but I probably won't be able to do that for at least another 6 to 9 months at the earliest, and even then it would probably then be like another 6 months at minimum before, even if they bid, of okay, what's the next project. So I'm kind of enjoying this weird little niche I've carved for myself, I think it's good. It's good. It's good. Kind of. I always consider storytelling to be practice. It's always practice for whatever the next thing is going to be. It's conditioning. Actually, that's a better way to say it. This is good conditioning. These books really, and with the teams that I'm working with Jonathan Lau and David A. Tinto, these books I think stand shoulder to shoulder with anything that the big two can put out. And so it's kind of nice, and it is kind of fun in the spirit of competition as well, to be like, all right, I know that Space Ghost doesn't have the cachet of Spider-Man, for example. All right, but I'm going to prove he can run with the big dogs. And 2 years in, the book keeps getting extended, so I think old Space Ghost, he still's got some tricks up his sleeve.
Hell yeah. I'll say, ever since discovered your work, and I know I haven't read everything you've done. It's hard to read everything anybody's done, but what I have read throughout your career, coming into Space Ghost, I just see like a writer growing and a guy who hit the right project at the right time. So congrats on that book. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And I was the guy who, yes, I saw your name on it and was happy for you. Didn't matter who the name was. I was buying a Space Ghost book, man. It's Space Ghost. I mean,
yeah.
And to get a book that good was just thrilling for a fan. So
that's the thing. I mean, I think that speaks to me as a creator in general. We talked about it a little bit with other creators earlier, but I do love. There's something about the potential that's been untapped that really kind of attracts me. Like, don't get me wrong, I wrote Spider-Man once, and it was the thrill of my career. But if you came to me with a magic wand and said, is there anybody you'd like to write at Marvel or DC, I'd probably say Doctor Strange or Shazam. I like being able to kind of leave my mark on these characters, and I love kind of finding the fun in characters that have been underserved or underloved. I mean, that was my Savage Avengers run. That was my Island of Misfit Toys that I was able to do a lot of real fun stuff with. And so Space Ghost is kind of one of those guys, or even, Speed Racer, like the fandom's passionate. They're there. I like them a lot. That when that re-release came out in IMAX, fans were very excited about the movie and our book. But I think, like I said, it's very easy to overlook these licensed books because I think it's easy to see them as like, oh, somebody just phoned it in. and those books do still happen from time to time. But I can tell you that I'm not in any position that I'm going to do a book just for a paycheck. I have done books in the past that I wasn't 100% on, that I thought maybe I could find something, or or maybe I'd be a good soldier, and those wind up being the ones that I'm the least satisfied with. It's always the ones that I'm like, okay, I feel something for this character. I feel there's potential to be mined. Those are always the books that wind up being my favorites to write.
Well, I'm gonna count on you to put in a good word for me. Somebody needs to make a ROM Space Knight book. I don't know who has the IP anymore, but like, if we could figure that out, man.
Boy, I think I imagine that's IDW. But I don't know. Maybe Marvel's got the rights back.
Well, it's weird right now because Marvel has the rights to the original Marvel run, and they were able to reprint it. But I don't think New Comics were part of that deal, and I wonder if that's part of the Energon universe.
I am not sure.
Yeah.
Rom is a little bit before my time as a Marvel fan, so I never really caught up with that character. I'm not so I don't have the affection for him that others do.
It's before my time too, David. But I'm telling you, the glory that is ROM Space Knight. You'll get there one day.
Maybe one day. One day. But yeah, I definitely I don't know. I mean, I already wrote a mech book, with 10-ton Titan Terrier. I know that's not the same thing, but I think if I did, I do have a Transformers idea in my back pocket that I would love to write someday. I know that they're being very conservative about how they spread those out, but that could be a really fun license, and it'd be a fun thing to approach. I feel like I think sometimes I was born like 15 years too late to write the Defenders. Those guys always kind of strike me as my jam. That weird collection of oddballs. Like, you can do cool stuff with that. Yeah. But I think that's comics in a nutshell. It comes in waves. And sometimes there's a wave where you love picking up all the obscure characters. I know DC's starting to do that with All In, and that's very exciting to me. A Firestorm book and an Etrigan book. Like, yeah, hell yeah, sign me up. I know. Whereas like at Marvel, it's a little bit of a harder sell, I think, to get some of these more obscure characters, or at least that's what they tell me every time I pitch them ForceWorks. So it comes in waves. But yeah, I think the strength of these shared universes is you do have the A-listers, but then you have like the weird little guys as well that can kind of surprise you. But I think you need a healthy A-list to do that, and I think right now, like, a lot of all the companies are sort of, I think, thinking long and hard about, like, how do we make our A-listers really shine, and whether it's something like the Absolute line, which is sort of, I'm very curious to see kind of how that plays out with the main line, because the Absolute line is so popular. Does that result in a balkanization with the main DC universe in terms of sales or spotlight or popularity? I have no idea. I
think we're seeing a modern day Ultimate Universe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we might be seeing. Yeah, like, and I know, even in the Ultimates, when the Ultimates universe first came out, there was a degree of that balkanization before they sort of had, they were able to kind of really shore up, the main pillars with JMS and Spider-Man and Morrison on New X-Men, and Bendis on New Avengers. So, I think we're sort of on that wave. I think those things might come hopefully sooner versus later. But yeah, we're sort of this is sort of the we're holding our breath now, but I think the exhale will come soon.
Yeah. You don't have to write it, but you just get in the right ears. Like, this annoying podcaster won't shut up about Rom. Can you just make a 4-issue series for him so he'll shut up about it?
Yeah.
David, you've been awesome with your time.
Of course.
I love talking with you. I feel like we could go on for another 2 hours if we really wanted to.
Well,
but
thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. And for everyone watching and listening, the OZ is up on Kickstarter right now. Every pledge matters. We would love to have you join us as our Yellow Brick Road Warriors. So definitely would love to have you.
See, David's a professional. He beats me to my finishing question. So with that, though, I know we had a long conversation about how much social media sucks, but where can people follow you on social media?
I'm on Twitter, regretfully, Blue Sky and Instagram at Pepose D, or at David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can also visit my website at davidpepose.com, or more importantly, visit the OZ's Kickstarter page at tinyurl.com/the OZ comic.
There you go, everybody. And if that's too much to remember this. Go to the show notes down below, and I'll have the link to the Kickstarter, to David's website, and you'll see all of his social media there as well, so you can find him online wherever you decide to spend your time, social media-wise. David, like I said, absolute pleasure, man. I don't need to wish you luck with the campaign because you're already killing it with the campaign. Best of luck with the rest of it.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. It was so good to catch up with you. And thank you for joining our Emerald Army and being a part of the OZ. We do appreciate it.